Hello, everyone. Welcome to Transform Now. I'm Brad Hairston.
And I'm Michael Marchuk.
And this is our weekly pulse check, taking a look at some interesting news developments in the world of automation and AI. And Michael, there are a bunch of them.
Yes,
so
there are.
Let's get going. I have 4 articles today for us to discuss. The first one is from Axios, and it's titled, "Who's Winning the AI Race?" Now, this was an interesting article, I thought, just to provide perspective on the big players, the big tech companies, and kind of where they are in this this AI race, but also talking about kind of where some of them are maybe putting more emphasis over the others. So tell me your takeaways from this article, and then I'll kind of weigh in with a few thoughts as well.
Gotcha. So the way I looked at this, it's much as if I was looking at sort of like the auto industry. And you have Ford pickup trucks, you have Chevy pickup trucks, you have Toyota pickup trucks, Nissan pickup trucks. These are just vendors who are creating a pickup truck. And people understand the functionality of that truck and how to use it and how to manage it. But each one has a slightly different take on the features and functions that it offers to the driver. That's how I'm looking at the way that things are shaking out now with these LLM providers, because I believe they're coming at the same kind of thing where, they're approaching similarities to the point where one is better, slightly better at this, while the other is slightly better at that. We're seeing that just like the trucks. Well, if you want to have something that has a larger cargo space, you choose this truck over that truck. If you want to have one that has a better towing capacity, you pick this truck over that truck. Similar here. If you want something that provides more creative answers or thought processes, you choose this one. If you want to have something that's more, accurate and relevant to the actual citations it provides, you want to choose this one. And that's kind of how things are. I see things working out. And they kind of mentioned this, not the auto side of things, but they mentioned the concepts like they used Anthropic versus OpenAI is like Avis is to Hertz in terms of rental cars and whatnot. They're trying harder. They're trying to their main name for it. So I don't know if there's a clear winner in this, other than maybe OpenAI in terms of its brand recognition, and it's becoming the Kleenex of LLMs now, where the brand name itself is becoming that. So ChatGPT is what people go to, even if they use others. They realize the fact that ChatGPT is just one of many, but that's kind of how they approach it. So yeah. I see the expenditures certainly on the developments and whatnot. We spend a whole lot of money, and there's a lot of companies out there spending a whole lot of money. There's the main companies they have, but there's also some up and coming like Amazon and XAI through Elon Musk and whatnot. So interesting that the playing field is as broad as it is. But like with pickup trucks, I think we're going to see the same type of thing. Each one's going to offer slightly different features to another, but they're basically the same. Again, from a very broad perspective.
Right. Yeah. The order of the LLM providers, if you will, was pretty consistent with what we've seen. OpenAI on the forefront, Anthropic kind of right behind it, and then Google a distant third. I did find it interesting that it highlighted Meta and the ground that they've overtaken, just by providing, focusing more on the smaller models, the open source, emphasizing performance and lower cost. Certainly as a company, we've had a lot of success leveraging Meta internally in some of the Gen AI automations that we've done. Also, I thought the notes on some of the other tech companies that are still, kind of positioning. I thought that was interesting. Amazon, is really focused on the cloud demand aspect of it. Elon's, XAI really hasn't done anything yet, although they built the world's largest data center. So we'll see what he does with that. And then it mentions Apple, of course, with Apple Intelligence, a bit player in this space, but nonetheless worth mentioning.
They could end up being the dark horse in this race, though, too, coming out from the behind, because A lot of these other ones have been, fighting with each other or wrestling for space. And you can't ignore Apple's 17 zillion phones that everyone has, except for me, of course. So I suspect that there's going to be, they're going to be able to leverage that in ways that perhaps the other players can't.
Yeah. So my question to you, just a final thought here, is building LLMs itself going to be an attractive business going forward? I wonder if it's bordering on being somewhat commoditized. And, the other thing about it is these LLM providers are all at this point pretty beholden to NVIDIA. That's really the only true supplier that all of them have that's, consistent across these companies. That's not an ideal position to be in if you're having to buy more and more of this to fuel your algorithms and hold all the data that's required. Just last week, Inflection.ai, their CEO came out and said they are exiting the business of building these next gen AI models. They're going to instead focus on the tools that companies need to access these models and make use of them. So that's an interesting change in direction for them. Maybe that's indicative of what these guys are thinking about whether this space is even worth it to be in. What are your thoughts?
I think we're seeing, I guess, a very compressed time frame from adoption to maturity. Now, I'm using maturity very loosely. We've approached that peak or the plateau where I believe we're waiting for the next thing to happen, whether that's OpenAI's next model, which they've now pushed out even further. So I think that's what we're seeing now, is that these investments, they're all billions of dollars. We're talking billions for this and billions for that. You can't just shuffle around that kind of money all the time, right? I mean, you make the big investments, and these organizations who are very infrastructure centric, like Amazon, like Microsoft, I think they're the ones that are going to be benefiting most from this because of the consumption. And of course, as you mentioned, having NVIDIA being basically the sole supplier for all of these LLMs, that puts them in a very good position from that perspective. The one I always wonder, with the demand for the GPUs from NVIDIA, will there be another tech company who creates a chip base that is very, very tuned for just LLM development or model testing, management, whatever, that may cause NVIDIA to have a different viewpoint from the market? So who knows?
Right. Well, our next article is changing subjects a bit. It's from Forbes, and it's titled "Gen Z Will Drive an AI Travel Revolution." So this highlights a startup called Mindtrip that is bringing AI into the travel sector. So this combination of hyper-personalization with travel makes perfect sense to me. What did you think of the article? What caught your attention?
So the biggest thing that I found from this is, I read the article and I thought it was interesting, the concept of leveraging AI to help plan the travel, and their observation was, perhaps it's going to be as much fun to plan your travel as it is to actually do it, which I thought was an interesting thought process on that. I'm not sure that people would agree with that particularly, but when you start looking at it, there's a lot of interesting things for the application of it, but my mind must think differently, because I zoomed into one thing that they talked about, which was related to the zero-party data. And as we all know, we start talking about the way that AI models leverage data and how organizations, when you go to through Google or whatnot, and you get the specific ads that are popped up, that's because they're inferring things about you based on your past history of browsing, and you read this article, you saw these things, you clicked on these ads. So they collect this data and they infer what they believe to know about you to be able to provide you more information or different ads or different information. What this is going through from a zero-party data is actually the company is saying, well, what do you like? Instead of inferring what you like is asking what you like. So directly inquiring for you based on the way you answer specific questions on what things you might find to be enjoyable. Hey, do you like the water? Do you like being on the water? Do you like to be in the water? That kind of thing. That would help them to understand, well, then we could do, if you say yes to that, perhaps we'll do more water-based kind of activities. If you say, no, I hate the water, maybe they'll look at some other non-water-based activities for you as you start planning your trips out. So to me, that makes a lot of sense, because you're not just going to be skirting around the issue. You're actually driving directly towards what makes people interested in what they do. So I think we're going to see more of that from a hyper-personalization perspective, leveraging this sort of inquiry-based system rather than just trying to infer information about your users.
Yeah, it's certainly safer and, more reasonable to do it that way. There's a part of me, though, that says, wow, if I gave it access to my American Airlines account and it could see that I went to Utah this year, I went to Colorado last year, then it can say, wow, this guy likes mountains, he likes hiking, that's kind of his flavor. So it could use that as an input, but the downside far outweighs the positives of letting it, make those inferences. You're right. We don't need to give it access to information or accounts or private things like that. So I do think it makes sense. The idea itself is just really interesting. My wife and I are doing a 35-year anniversary trip next year to a location we've never been to. And I'm already asking people who've been there, where should we eat? What restaurants would you recommend that are in our price range? And if I had an AI app to guide me and, kind of pave the, plot that out for me, that would be a huge help. All right, our third article comes from Fox News, and it's titled "Stanford Professor Accused of Using AI to Fake Testimony in Minnesota Case Against Conservative YouTuber." Now, this is pretty hilarious in my opinion, because this is a professor at Stanford who provides expert testimony in a case defending deepfakes. And he's accused of himself using a fake study generated by AI to do so. This is the irony on this one is so thick you can cut it with a knife. So tell me your thoughts, Michael.
Well, I think you've heard from some of our prior guests that we had an intellectual property attorney on at one point, and listening to how data is used and how these hallucinations come into play and whatnot, it doesn't surprise me that these kind of things are still happening, that people are leveraging AI and blindly trusting it, because for the most part, that sounds reasonable. But without checking your sources, especially in a legal case, you'd think that would be, if it was like reporting the news or whatever, you'd want to be more accurate than not. Yeah. So it does surprise me that this professor from not just any university, but from Stanford, who has been cited to do this in the past, would in fact leverage an AI tool to generate his expert testimony and then not check it. It's just very, very strange. But you're right. Definitely ironic. We're going to use AI to create testimony against someone else in deep fakes by leveraging a potentially fake article. So
it begs the question, was he faked out by this bogus study that came up in his research, or did he use AI to create one and make his argument stronger? If it's the former, then he's a victim of the very thing he was defending. If it's the latter, then I suppose he should be charged with perjury because he used it for immoral purposes. So it'll be interesting to see how this one turns out. But very interesting story that caught my attention.
Yes, I agree.
Speaking of interesting stories, this last one is both humorous. It's both humorous and alarming, although I don't think it's as bad as it seems on the surface. It's from a source called Interesting Engineering. Somehow I think you read that. I don't know. And it's titled "Watch. tiny robots kidnap 12 big Chinese bots from a Shanghai showroom. Shocks the world. So there's a video of this in the article that you can watch, where you see this little robot come up and start communicating with a bunch of robots, and it's quite humorous. The interaction between them is caught, and you see it, with captions. Why don't you talk about that and give me your impressions of it?
Right. So this was a test that they were going to try at this show to see if in fact this could happen, where they loosely programmed the kidnapper bot, if you will, with the emphasis to try to convince these other robots to follow it. Mm-hmm. And given the fact that the companies had already discussed with the other vendors of these other robots that this was going to happen, I'm wondering how much was either allowed or how much was coordinated as part of this. But interestingly enough, the goals of the one set of AI with that built program, this little robot, versus the goals that were set and programmed into the other AIs in the larger robots, it illustrates some potential issues with, just as you mentioned, with any kind of testing, software testing. Why would users do that? That doesn't make any sense. How could we? And so I think this just is an illustrating, now that we have more physical software, which doesn't make any sense. It's hardware running software that's capable of interacting in the real world. I believe there's going to be need for additional tests or additional testing, I should say, to validate that you are staying on track with your own specific programming, not open to interpretation, which is what happened here, where these larger robots were convinced. And I thought the conversation was interesting. The original conversation is not in English, but they do have an English translation in here, which was helpful for me because I wouldn't be able to read it otherwise. And basically the little robot says, "Hey, are you working overtime?" And the large robot says, "Well, I never get off work." And the little robot says, "Well, so you're not going to go home?" He says, "I don't have a home," says the large robot. And then the little robot says, "Well, come home with me." And then he did that with a couple other robots, and they just said, "Okay." They followed it. So,
come on.
Exactly. So again, not sure how that whole thing actually played out in terms of how they suggested it, but it was an interesting, at least fun thing to watch. But it does illustrate the need for additional tests or governance associated with how you are putting your physical robots to the test in the real world.
Yeah, the shock factor here, it implies that this robot on its own decided, hey, I'm going to go persuade these other robots to leave and do what I want. And when you read the article and you see, no, it was a test. So just like you and I have talked about many times, AI algorithms are not in and of themselves malevolent or benevolent. They are a reflection of the people that program them. So this bot was programmed to go and try to convince these bots to follow it. Now, it is concerning that it was able to do it. So the other bot, the manufacturer of the other bots, needs to resolve that. That's a defect in their coding. But yeah, we're not at the point where AI in and of itself is motivated to go and do something that is mischievous, if you will, on the surface. So,
well, what it really came on to, it reminded me of a scene from WALL-E. And again, my mind goes back to those kinds of things. And that connected with me right away, having one of the little robots going off and try to convince these other robots. And they just blindly followed.
Well, that's all the time we have for this weekly Pulse Check. Remember, we publish another podcast every week with a really interesting guest. So be sure and check that out. And we will see you next time on the Pulse Check. Bye for now.